you. Well, thanks for coming. This is going to be about video games and auxiliary content associated with the video game industry, stuff that spins out. You know, everybody has an intellectual property product, right? Video game, and no one expects the Spanish Inquisition, or that was a reference to a 1980s film. Does anybody get that? Because, you know, I'm riffing off of 1980s video game culture a little bit. That's why I have the Ready Player One thing going on. So that's not a spoiler alert. Spoiler alert, I don't want to ruin Ready Player One, the great movie. And the book. Anywho, so yes, people have intellectual properties, right? They make them a video game, and no one expects what kinds of derivative works, what kinds of things are going to spin out of them. The definition of what a derivative work is pretty fixed when it comes to things like Harry Potter, right? If I write fan fiction on Harry Potter, that's a derivative work. I'm using all the characters, maybe spinning out the storyline. But if I do a derivative work of a video game, what does that mean? If I record myself playing a video game, right? And make commentary and do crazy tricks or whatever. Is that a derivative work, or is that transformative? Which is it, right? So a lot of this has to do with that question. A lot of the research that I've done has to do with that question, transition between, well, how does something like a platform like YouTube afford that kind of play? And by what I mean by afford, that's from like HCI language. You guys get it? Right? That means, well, are the features going to let this happen or not? Are they preventative? Are they positive affordances or not? And it's also a play on words. Can you afford the intellectual property liability that you might want if you want to make your platform particularly playful to let your users mickey around with intellectual property products that maybe are not, could be transformative, could not be transformative, but mashup culture or, practices that let people screw around a little bit with the intellectual property product may give you something entirely new, entirely transformative. And as a platform owner, you capitalize that. As a participant in that, you get to share in the profits, hopefully. So how do you design platforms that strike that balance? That's the underlying question, right? I don't know. I started doing this work in 2009. I lived a blessed existence. I get to play video games and call that and just have so much fun, right? And that's my research. And I get to play video games. I get to hang out with video gamers. I get to hang out with communities that love playing games and ask them how it is that they take something that they love so much and transition it into a business product or send it out there to the world. What compels them to do that? Culture is important. Right? If you're going to design something, I would say you need a cultural anthropologist, especially if you have a really committed community for the product that you hope to host, let's say, on your platform, right? You need to find out what matters to them the most. So that's what motivates me. The intellectual property question is important to me. I mean, I've written a book on it. I've been called a copyright anarchist. That's because I have a really limited... I'm not a big fan of the US copyright system, so if you want to read my book, you can get it for free from the MIT Press because I magically negotiated a Creative Commons license for it. And people search and figure out how I managed that. So it's available. You can download it for free. Okay, so here's what I got. Does this look familiar to anybody? Right, this is Twitch Plays Pokemon. And Twitch is in a particular, back when I started this project in 2009, video game commentary was still in its infancy, yeah? Maybe the directors, I guess directors, who were starting out their channels, maybe had 100 subscribers, 100 subs, that's not a lot at all, right? But I thought it's going to become something, and I wondered, wow, YouTube has really done a great job in making it possible for a platform to be just super plastic. In other words, have the ability to accommodate all kinds of different content in a modular way so that users can adaptively put their content up there in whatever way that they can identify with. Then after some time of doing that, Justin TV, y'all remember Justin TV, the first version of Twitch, right? So then Twitch was even more plastic, I think. But that's not to say that YouTube isn't great. It's just that, okay, this is a different set of, and the reason was that their intellectual property or their terms of service requirements were a little less stringent. So in this case, Twitch plays Pokemon. In case you don't know, I get to play a little bit of a video. Is someone, obviously the channel owner, hacked away at the interface so that chat commands would end up being play commands, right? So anybody who's watching the live stream could then send chat commands in, and you end up playing Pokemon, even though you technically should be the audience watching the live stream, right? But now you're the player. So are you ready to be a player as an audience? That's great. I was sitting at Virginia Tech in a panel with the Associate Registrar of Copyrights, right? The second in command copyright officer in the United States. And I raised this question, who do we blame? Who's liable for a DMCA claim, a Digital Millennium Copyrights claim? Because obviously there was some circumvention, right? Some patent law got whacked up a little bit. And we could not come to that conclusion. And not that Twitch cared. Right? Maybe Nintendo cared. Nintendo tends to care more than other companies, but not that Twitch cared. And who would you hold liable anyway? So the plasticity of the platform, and I want you guys, if you can, remember that word plasticity, allowed for modular putting together like what you would consider disparate platforms, a video game platform, an interface on a web page, a platform, and a chat commands that allowed this modularity to come together to this novel product. And it kept going, right? All right, so as a designer, I would think, I mean, I used to teach for product and design innovation at Rensselaer Polytechnic, and modularity, the ability to have enough structure to have fixed elements, but enough plasticity to have the user design it's his or her ultimate imagined use, that's magic, right? That's great. That's an adaptive system, discrete infinity. Anyway, so that's how I started thinking about platforms generally and how do you design them. And video game culture was particularly well suited to study it because they're always playing. They're always hacking away, either at the game rules, right? How to cheat, how to workarounds, or also how to show their content. So I'm going to play this in the background. Do not be distracted. All right, if you want, you can be distracted. I don't know, there's no sound, okay. You're going to be distracted, but I'm going to talk to you anyway. So in 2009, I started following the Call of Duty community. The Call of Duty community, it started with Modern Warfare 2. I needed to play better because I sucked. And I thought, well, maybe YouTube has a how-to, right? And it turns out it was entertaining beyond its use value. In other words, I could learn some things from the people I was watching. By the way, this is me. I could learn things from the people I was watching, but I also found it incredibly entertaining. It was entertaining for so many reasons. The commentary, the way they were talking about the gameplay was great. The tips and tricks were great. And maybe they weren't terrible. Yes, I know it's Modern Warfare. I know this is the Black Ops iteration. And I know there's a lot of problems with game culture generally. So I'm focusing on the positive. So there was a lot of learning to be done. Anyway, this guy isn't bad, huh? It's not bad for a college professor. So anyway, what I learned was that gamers had put together a whole bunch of different types of technologies to make themselves better. That's great. But also that they had created entertainment by doing it because the platform had afforded it. And the platform did these three things that are really important, right? It gave them a sense of ownership. So in other words, what people could do by modifying the game from a play experience to a viewership product gave them a sense of ownership. That's what Henry Jenkins down at USC has called a moral economy, right? So if your platform can afford a little bit of moral economy from your audience, that's a win because now they're invested, right? That requires people to give up the idea that any media product is a done product. Who here has written anything or designed something and you sort of set it out in the world, right? And then you think, gee, that's it. I struggled and I sweat and that was, but then what would you do if someone comes along and modifies it in some way, changes it, creates fiction out of it? The idea is that the platform should have an element of welcoming things that are modifications of existing media products, which would be a derivative work, right? But that gives people ownership. That's great. The other thing is belonging, the sense of belonging. Does anybody here know the term brony? Okay. Should I clarify that for folks? A brony is typically a young man between the ages of 18 or even younger, and however, who has an affinity, a fanish affinity, they're fans of My Little Pony. My Little Pony is a TV series from the 1980s, features a little pony. They're kind of cute. Anywho, this fan group would have been an isolated fan group if it hadn't been for the web, right? Once they got on the web and started talking about it, they created an emergent culture. Now you can go to Comic-Con, right? Has anybody here been to Comic-Con? I'm sure people have been to Comic-Con. If you go to Comic-Con, you'll see people doing cosplay on My Little Pony. The point of this is that the platform of, let's say, the internet, if we're going to talk in big terms, created a space for culture to exist, to happen, to exist outside of, let's say, your own small group of people or even just yourself, right? Culture requires more than one. Video game culture is the same way, right? Especially around this particular genre of video game commentary. That if it wasn't for the fact that a platform afforded communication with others about the game and things that maybe were experienced in the game, then that sense of culture of belonging as something that's bigger than yourself would have been lost. You would have maybe had friends to play with, maybe LAN parties, but otherwise there wouldn't be anything bigger or that grows. So that's great for the platform. And then freedom of movement. Freedom of movement means the idea that the platform isn't locked up, that the feature set interfaces with other feature sets that may not necessarily be owned by your platform, right? Okay, so I'm gonna quickly bring myself up to date because, I talk and then my notes will refocus me. All right, so these are the three, sort of the magic recipe, right? The triumvirate. And let's see. Here we go. We covered all these, and then we go to this guy, the ghost in the shell. If you're going to have a platform, right, that is going to afford a level of plasticity, a level of user power, you're going to have to be prepared for indeterminacy and surprises, right? Things are going to happen in a system that is already chaotic because it has so many moving parts that are going to be wholly unexpected. Game designers know this, right? They call it emergence. Emerges in AI, but also emerges in player behavior. But also, you can think of it as emergence in user behavior. And I think the YouTube gaming community showed that particularly well, right? Things happen on the YouTube gaming community that I think were entirely unexpected. The Twitch Plays Pokemon is great, but also the fact that there is such a thing as a video game commentary. And this is before YouTube gaming, by the way. So all my references are historical. Yes, YouTube gaming now exists, but it wouldn't have existed if it hadn't first existed as YouTube video game commentary for years before that, right? This starts in 2008, 2009, and YouTube gaming didn't come out till 2015, right? So it took a whole year as a response to this level of user activity, right? And as a response also to the competition, Twitch was really ready to dole out on that particular field, right? So you got to be ready for surprises, and video game commentary communities provided the proof of that they were going to do interesting and new things. And okay, so you want to have a platform that gives you some plasticity, some user control, belonging, a sense of belonging, some freedom of movement, and I'm going to go back to that one, and ownership, right? But then you have to balance it because, well, you are a corporation. So, right? It has to be balanced with some things. You have to have the freedom to create play, right? To be able to play in the platform. At the same time, that has to be balanced with three things. Overly grabby copyright regimes. Obviously, that's the Death Star with a big C, right? And all your creativity are belong to us. Does anybody know that particular reference to video game culture, right? There's a great video game from the 80s that it was dubbed over with dicey English, and it said, all your base are belong to us. It's awesome. So it's become a thing in video. So now every time we talk about something ridiculous like I'm going to get you, we say all your base are belong to us. So that's why I have it on there. All your creativity are belong to us. So you don't want to be this Death Star. You don't want to be the platform, right, that says all your creativity are belong to us. You do not, right? Especially when the culture is one of sharing. when the culture is one of participation, when the culture is one of performance, right? That is going to be a hard sell. Okay. So there's overly grabby copyright regimes, purposefully designed incompatibility between platforms. You don't want to close off your platforms. The reason the YouTube system worked was because it was pretty open. Who here has ever seen the CBS logo show up on the NBC in an NBC broadcast anywhere, anytime, ever, in mass media, ever? Never, right? Yeah, but you're all on YouTube. You have a Twitter logo. You guys are mixing your You guys are mixing your trademarks, and you don't care because your platform, right, the YouTube platform, is open to others. That is a win. If I were to use economics, I would say that's a great example of the Nash equilibrium, right? Of maximizing overall wealth by loosening, by making decisions about choices, right? That account for an everybody wins state, like a zero-sum game, right? All right, so there has to be a certain acceptance of chaos, right? That users are unruly, users are going to do whatevs, and a particular brand of user, a particular type of participatory user is going to do it much more so than others. But these might be the users that you want to foster and afford because they're the most creative. They're inventing things on the fly and they wish they could do it, right? So let me give you the perspective from a video gamer, someone like myself, right? Yes, I am. That's the other thing. You can't really talk about a medium, right, unless you really, I don't know, otaku, unless you submerge yourself in it. You know, it's really important to just really be voracious, right, about a medium that you love and talk about. Okay, so here goes. This is the view of the YouTube platform from a gamer's perspective, circa 2009. We'll start with, what did video gamers who were going to put stuff online think was the profit motive of YouTube? This is it. It's basically, they didn't care. As far as they were concerned, it's the GNOME plan for profit, right? They knew YouTube was collecting everything. That's the metaphor, the underpants, just collect anything that's visual. The profit motive or the profit system was unknown to them, or they didn't care at the beginning. And all they really cared about was playing and sharing their passion. That was it. Who here knows about creative communities? Has anybody ever participated in a creative community? Creative communities tend to not care about the profit motive too much, especially in the stages when they're putting up their rough drafts, right? It's important for them to share, but the profit motive is really not always in their scheme of thinking. And this is why I have this. This is one of my favorite elements of South Park, or moments in South Park when they presented the GNOME plan for profit, which is basically the beginning. This is how they saw it. But of course that changed, right? When partnerships rolled in, when YouTube partnerships rolled in, when machinima partnerships started showing up, then that changed and the profit motive became very real. Then their mindset changes, but this is the beginning. This is the other thing that's really important. Who can recognize this particular image? Anybody? Yeah, there we go. That is Wargames. I think I just watched it again the other day. This is one of the first true representations of video game culture. And this is 1984, 85. So what YouTube commentators did was recreate this moment. They recreated this moment. Now, I know, I'm going to date myself, okay? In the 80s, after I got out of school, I would gather my quarters from the pittance of my paper route, and I would head over to Jimmy's Smoke Shop in New Britain, Connecticut. It's a post-industrial town, not a lot of money to go around. We were just working class kids, and we had quarters. We didn't have Atari. So we would go to the arcade and play video games, things like Galaga or Pac-Man or whatever, and meet other people and talk about the games and learn how to better play the game and develop culture in situ, on site, right? Maybe meet some cool older kids who were much better at it. We would even cheer. And we would tribalize. We're like, oh, you like Bob's way of playing Pac-Man? He's a punk. All these things were real, but in flesh and bone. The culture existed in flesh and bone, right? And we got to talk shit to each other. We got to call each other names. called each other's moms' names, whatever it was, right? Instead of going to play basketball, maybe, because we used to do that. You ever anybody play basketball in the city? If you play basketball in inner city, talking smack is like a skill, okay? So if you don't talk smack, you suck. You know, you're even worse. So you had to talk smack. That was how it was. And if you could, I wish there were camcorders back then or cell phones that I could record it because it existed. YouTube created that again. Not in the same way. It wasn't flesh and bone. It wasn't at the same time. It was, across time zones. But you got to talk a lot of crap. You got to cheer for your friends. You got to do all these things. And you got to meet new people. So YouTube recreated this. I don't know if they did it inadvertently or whether the gamers who were putting this stuff up there knew this is what they were doing, or maybe it's just the way the medium works. But this is one of the reasons why it also worked, right? Because whatever it is about video game culture, this kind of competitive play and camaraderie and smack talking existed before, just not online. It exists, so it was just reproduced. So that's another thing that it afforded, that the platform afforded, right? Importing external cultures. That's really important. Practices. So does anybody recognize any of this? Did anybody ever play? So I'm talking about one particular game because it was sort of the most popular game of the time on the Xbox and PlayStation platforms, right? Modern Warfare series. Okay, you all play video games, I'm assuming. And some video games just have elements of suck, right? They might be great in some respects, but there are other elements that just stink. And you know it when you're playing it. And you think, God, I wish I could just tell the designers, oh, this just sucks. Or talk to somebody about how much. So this is a little poster of the most hated elements of Modern Warfare 2. And I'm going to focus on this one, boosting. If you've played this game, I'll give you the game mechanic real quickly. Let's say you're in competitive play and someone, you get knocked out on the competition, you spawn back in. But there's this little thing, you attack insert, you press you break the stick, you put it down, and you will respawn exactly where that insert was located. Great, you get to respawn. But people started doing that so they can get kill streaks, so they can get like awards. So you would get your buddy to show up in there in online play, and you'd sit there camp in a corner, like a little sneaky, and you just crack this thing, and then you shoot each other in the head a couple of times, and just keep spawning. And it's ridiculous, right? And it was game breaking because you're sitting there playing the game, you're super competitive, you're doing it, and then you hear, and you hear it in the sound because you have your headset because you're a beast player, right? Because you know what you're doing, you have your surround set, and you're thinking, who the hell is cheating? So you start trolling, going around the map. You forget the objective of the game because someone's in some corner shooting, cheating. So you go around, you look around, and you realize they're cheating. And oh, don't you wish you could tell? So you get to go in the lobby and talk about it, but no more talking about it. No more. That's it. You get until. Let me make sure that this is silence because this guy gets pretty serious about it. Is he gonna play? It's slow. Oh, there it is. So this guy made a series of videos on tracking these cheaters down and making their lives difficult for cheating. So but he was pretty exciting. He did a pretty interesting job about it. I'm gonna erase it just a little bit because maybe. And he's a fan of hard rock, so who can hate on that? So he would find these cheaters in little corners of the map and put the hurting on them in really creative ways, like throwing Semtex at them. And you understand, you hear the overlay. That's Duke Nukem. So not only would he use a number of intellectual, right? Not only would this is awesome, and he was on Justin TV, by the way. So he was one of the first live streamers on Justin TV circa 2009. So his thing was, so it became entertaining. So this moment that you had in video game culture, right, in playing at home or playing with friends, of hating on the game, became entertainment for you, right? Who here has gone to the dentist and felt, and had a particularly painful dentist experience, and then gone online and watched other people have it and laughed hysterically. Right? I mean, I don't know, maybe you're crazy like that, but I haven't. But that's the idea. That it took something that was a user experience, right, in video games that was objectionable, right? Someone's cheating, people get angry, and made entertainment. It made the kind of TV genre that's called characters you love to hate, right? So that was afforded by the platform and the creativity of the user. But think of how many intellectual property products went into that particular cut. There's some rock music, and I think he used to use Metallica until the copyright strikes started rolling down, right? He's using Duke Nukem voiceovers, like tasty, right? Things like that. And that's an intellectual property product. And I don't know if YouTube has an algo to recognize those kinds of sound inputs, but that's still going, so I don't think so. So these are a number of loosey-goosey applications of transformative works, right, to make that happen. Now, I've been talking about features that can cobble together and media that can get cobbled together on a platform that allows all this to happen, right? But it's not just one platform, it's a number of platforms. Think of it as a bricolage. That was a pretty fancy word for a gaming guy. So it just means like a hodgepodge, right? You put it all together to make this one. So think of the experience of this sort of affording play as a collage of features. It's bigger than the one platform. If the platform, here's Twitter, right? I mean, come on. How many, so YouTube has this Twitter. You can set the little Twitter icon in there somewhere. How often does this happen that a platform is just entirely, of any media, is open to other inputs from other media? That's really unique. That is not something that happens often. And there might be some cases, but I think in mass media, and when I say it's unique, I say it's unique in media. Mass media do not have this. Traditional mass media. Digital media, because of the networked environments, do have it. So let me scroll here so my notes, I'm staying on track. Yes, I am. Okay, good. All right. This allowed for a certain kind of narrative to evolve. When you hear a story or when you read a story, right, it's your book, right? Or it's the podcast, or it's the radio. What if the story stopped at the book and said, follow the rest of the story on Twitter, follow the rest of the study on YouTube? So that is the idea that I'm trying to get at, that the narratives, the stories that were told through this video language were not just confined to the one, they were across platforms. So the plasticity is not just about all the feature sets, it's about the ways in which the one we'll call it the central platform, YouTube, allowed the other ones in and out. And so allowed users to flow through, right? My favorite example is the Twitter beef. I love Twitter beefs. They're so fun. So these commentators would stage Twitter beefs. They start hating on each other on Twitter, right? Like in high school or middle school, you hated on each other in English class. And then you went outside and settled your differences, or maybe you challenged each other to a duel, I don't know, whatever it was. So they would start Twitter beefs over here on Twitter. And then the story would continue somewhere in the channel where they would have themselves some hate, go back and forth. And then they would go somewhere else. Then it would go to the comments sections. This was staged. In a lot of cases, they just had called each other up. They were actually good friends. And they said, why don't we, our viewership is a little down. Why don't we stage some drama? And they would. But it had flow throughout. So let's say you're at school and you're wondering how much hate Bob is giving to Jan today. So you go on Twitter and instead of firing up your video, right, your YouTube app, you just kind of go on Twitter and see where the hate is at. Hate, unfortunately, I'm using hate as a lot. Sometimes it was collaboration, some sort of like project that they were working on. So these things are, but it wouldn't be possible. This sort of multimodal narrative about of one media product wouldn't be possible unless there was this plasticity, this ability to link things together. So users are like kittens, especially when they're given a significant amount of freedom. They will create things. They will mess things up sometimes. They will import things that you didn't expect, but they will also be super cute, like kittens. No, maybe not so super cute, but they will also put together things that you did not expect. They will create for you, right? My summary of this. And the narratives that evolve will be multimodal. It's a real interesting way to look at it in terms of discrete infinity, that all these different elements to the platforms that you put together. Does everybody know the term discrete infinity, maybe? Discrete infinity is the idea that you have limited modules, but infinite possibilities, right? Limited components, infinite outputs. It's a term from linguistics to explain why limited number of phonemes or letters can produce infinite number of words, right? Or it's also in AI, and limited number of circuitry or things produce indeterminate number of outputs, right? So if you can create a modular platform that affords playfulness, not only with its feature set, but also with the way the content is mashed up on other platforms, you will have discrete infinity. You will have a near infinite resource for creativity. That's my hypothesis. That's my findings, I think. Things happened in these platforms that I could never have expected, and I don't think any machine could ever have computed the possibilities. So I love this image. This image is my metaphor for a well-designed platform. There are rules to this game that these kids are playing, right? But they are nearly invisible to them. And the ball is the platform. And they are in conversation with that platform, and that platform is in conversation with them. It is adapting to them, right? They'll kick it, right? They'll make it go in one direction or another. But their affect, the game that they're playing with it, revolves around the nearly invisible rules, which they all know, right? Which they function within, and the physics of the ball, but also the magic that happens when you're playing quickly and a ball goes somewhere unexpected. This is just a metaphor. All right, so what are the takeaways, let's say? What did we learn and how was it possible? The audience participation side of it also has a lot to do with who is contributing. I cannot emphasize this enough. These users were not thinking about copyright strikes. They could not care less, right? They could not care less. It only was part of their imaginary when they got a copyright strike, when channels got shut down, when music was pulled for whatever reason. One of my videos was yanked on my channel because I decided to use "It's Beginning to Look a Lot Like Christmas," right? And it lasted 24 hours before it got yanked on my channel because, well, there's a copyright strike on it. So, but I care because, well, I know I have to care about copyright, but these folks do not. And that's the other thing, that there is some audiences just are in a state, and maybe in life, right? 12 to 18-year-olds that just don't care. And sometimes that's the best place. There's a great book called The Art of Not Giving a Shit. And there's an element to that in creativity, and gamers have that. Gamers have that in the way hackers do, in the positive way. Hackers, hacker the pejorative sense, and there's hackers like, curious folks who are tinkerers, who like to play with things. If you give those a culture that is playful with things, the ability to play with them, they will create things for you, right? So these are my findings. Obviously, the intellectual property narrative and the profit motive kicks in. Some companies did it more than others, but ultimately, I think the findings are all that A, belonging, a sense of belonging, a sense of ownership, and freedom of movement are the key elements. These things will limit them, but the corporate culture is actually really important, right? So things like copyright, things like contractual agreements with your users from third-party owners, these things will create that balance, and the platform designer has to design that balance into it. But the corporate culture has a lot to do with it. I've studied hacker culture as well. And of all the communities that I've studied in my lifetime online, video game players are a lot like hackers. And the corporate culture Has anybody here ever modded a video game? So video game industry has been really open to letting its trade secrets and intellectual properties out of the door, right? That's hacker culture in its essence, right? Here's the source code. Hack away at it. Let's see. I remember I didn't hate him. I loved the physics in Quake 3, but I kind of wanted to run next to a missile sometimes. So then I went in there and I hacked away at it, and I slowed the missile speed down. So then I would just sit there and run next to a missile and like do crazy things because it was fun to do. I put that mod online, and people downloaded the mod. So the point is that of all the industries, the media and the creative industries, video games tend to be a little more open to letting their platforms be converted a little bit, be modified, right? So that new creative things can happen. So corporate culture is important. I would imagine my dream platform for media sharing is one that is modular, one in which a user can pick and choose the kinds of presentations, the kinds of formats that he or she wants to present and how they want to present them. And each user page is a unique YouTube experience. It's still YouTube, but it's Jane's YouTube. All right. So these are the 3 C's of success, right? And these 3 C's probably existed already. And if you've worked for YouTube, you probably know that they were doing this, but it wasn't obvious to the viewership. But after following this community for long enough, it is to me. Subscribers are the common currency, and that you have to have ways of catching them or recruiting them or growing your audience. And that can be done in a number of ways. The first is, of course, great content. Yes, people will show up, but also you would like to incentivize them to come. So maybe giveaways, right? I think the first time any user-generated content for video games showed up on the homepage, the splash page of YouTube, was when one gamer, XJaws, decided to do a giveaway. And if you rate, comment, and subscribe, he would put your name. He was giving away Xboxes. Big giveaway, not just like, I'll give you some, I'll give you candy. No, like big things. And he started getting millions of views. His subscriber base tripled. So he had a great catching strategy. He got a lot of hate for it, right, from the rest of the community because it's supposed to be a meritocracy. But there's other ways of catching it. Making entertaining content requires maybe staging a beef or some drama, and people show up, and that catches them. Caching them, that means you have to keep them, right? And so that's engagement through other platforms. Again, because the platform afforded it, they were able to put the little Twitter out and tell them, hey, I'm going to be on, or have a hosted lobby. And lastly, caching them. And that is the partnership programs. Initially, there were no partnership programs. Initially, you had to have a certain number of viewership. Once word got around, the profit motive really kicked in for them. But again, the platform afforded it. So what's the take home ultimately? Concluding, you can ask questions if you have them. Any jazz fans, this is a picture of the recording of Miles Davis' Kind of Blue, right? Some jazz fans consider this proof of the existence of God, right? Because Davis basically gave his quintet key signatures and tempo, and then they went at it, and they created atonal jazz in a number of sittings. Creativity, flow. That's because the platform, the rules of the platform, the structure, were fixed in tempo, key, right? But everything else was up to the players. And that, if platform designers start to see their users as players and afford play and just give basic directions, what will come out at the end will be the next Miles Davis, the next Michelangelo, the next whomever, right? Genius, if you have enough, you will be happy, or at least designers will be happy, that they built the tools. They gave them the canvases that they were able to use to become those geniuses. So that's the take-home message, the balance between structure and play, and seeing users as playful agents, not as folks that you need to shunted that you need to structure their behavior too much. And the video game commentary community in the beginning, historically, really showed that. Twitch is, in a lot of ways, doing crazy, not crazy things. I would say their structures are far looser. I've seen things on Twitch. I mean, I've been looking at the web for 20 years that make my jaw drop. I'm like, wow, and they've monetized it, so the content can be loosey goosey. Sometimes it's problematic, but that's sort of the price you sometimes pay. More you have to curate a little bit more effectively when you're gonna let go, when you create a little bit more chaos, let your users do whatevs. That's the take-home message. That's how a platform affords play and balances between the structure and the ghost in the shell. Any questions? Comments?
We would talk about your experience or comment on kind of like how you think like things in the flesh now, or kind of like real life gameplay kind of ties in with all these concepts you're talking about.
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes that I think a lot of internet scholars do is think that the culture is self-contained, right? But LARPs are live action role play, right? So in those cases, you are taking game scenarios and putting them elsewhere, right, in live action, and carrying them out. And sometimes game mechanics that are flawed in the game, we've had, at least the group I did it with was a failed feature LARP, right? So it would be something like a ridiculous, like in Modern Warfare 2, it was second chance, where the guy's sitting there like you shot him 1,000 times, but he still kind of can get at you, and that's everybody considered a fail. So one person got a ticket that was like, you get to be that guy that ruins it for everybody, and nobody knew, right? So it it created this, and it reinforced the meaning that we had in the game, right? Or sometimes we would do something in LARP that we would then carry into the game, right? There would be one guy who'd be instead of it being, let's say, team deathmatch, one guy would activate a grenade and start running around, and they're going to blow up on you soon, right? So he was the guy you had to find, but that's something we had done in LARP. So if that's what you mean, yeah. So there is this fluency between external cultures and internal culture in the game, and the fact that we could do it outside and bring it into, let's say, lobby, record it, and then put it on became a genre unto itself, right? So there were some lobbies you would walk in and they weren't actually playing the objective of the game. They were playing an objective they had devised somewhere else. So you went into search and destroy, and it wasn't search and destroy, it was something else. You went into team deathmatch, they were playing something else. And that was the two. So creativity, right? The designers never meant the game to be that, but some group in LARP, doing LARP did it. Or they reinforce some sort of notion of what the game should be. So I think if that's what you mean, yes, the conversations between the external and the internal, the flesh and bone and the digital, are really important. And if the platform allows for that and the fandom allows for that, then you have an open door for creative spaces. Yeah. Yes, live action role play is quite really fun.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in general, like, I'm very curious about like how things manifest in real life, or how like what can be done in real life that can or cannot be replicated like on a digital platform. So whether that be like LARPs or like ARGs, like immersive theater, like what are the applications of it? And like, if you're thinking about the form of theater itself as something that may arguably be like somewhat fizzling out, like what does it look like when you inject these new ideas into it?
Right.
Yeah.
I think audience participation. So for example, if in video games, right, when we were in the arcades and we were participating in the gameplay, if someone were to tell you, would you ever really watch someone on TV or play a video game? People go, no. But actually, yeah, people were doing it for a long time. People were watching other people play video games for a long time, right? So the idea is find media engagement exercises that people do together, in which others take joy in watching others do, right? We all watch we all love watching other people fail at sports, right? It's comedy, right? We watch them just epically fail. We can't play the sport. We are probably worse than they are. They're not as good, but we like watching that. So those are the things that I think people pour into let's say a video experience when it's a flesh and bone experience, when there is an element of enjoyment and viewership of another. So theater, right? I can't think of any other than sort of sports fails, sports fails are the first thing that comes to mind, where people like to watch other folks sort of fumble on themselves, trip a little. If that's what you mean in terms of performances, I think that's as close as I can get. But in video games, children playing with the Wii. Has anyone seen a small child who does not yet have full control of their motor skills play with a Wii stick? They beat each other with it. It's hilarious. I wish that was on YouTube, right? I know children, but things like that, where it was a family moment. It was hilarious that little Bobby just whacked Jimmy over the head with that damn stick. And you're lucky you have that little rubber thing on it. But it's these elements of like, that's video game culture. That only happens in video because the kids get fired up about it. But there might be other elements in participatory culture, in theater, or in music, right? Music fails are great as well. I know fails, I'm focusing on fails, but they tend to be funny. You know, I got beamed in the face one time with a baseball. Everybody laughed, including myself. You know, it was just like, okay, I just got beamed. So fails tend to be kind of funny. Slapstick. Any other questions? Comments? Yes?
So you talked about video game community as well. So there's communities on Reddit, there's communities on Twitch, streamer communities. Do you have any insights on what makes a community like successful?
Yes. There has to be a common language, right? And what I mean by language is symbolic, right? So everybody comes to it with an already existing experience. And they discover that they all share that particular symbolic experience, and then they start to circulate it. If it's a particularly robust experience, then that congeals the community really quickly. Like, for example, the brony example. They started on Reddit, right? Everybody had every member of that community had the general experience of loving that particular product. And they didn't have any place to present that until Reddit. And others affirmed it, and it was so strong, that connection, that congealed it almost instantaneously. That community came together. So there has to be something that ties them together, some sort of common symbology, right? And that's strength. Then there's also the dynamics. There is sometimes, roles emerge in communities. And at that point, you have the best communities are usually communities that tend to be horizontal. They tend to congeal. The leadership is sparse. So whenever someone starts to be a leader, too much of a leader, it tends to not work out. It tends to sort of, then people tribalize. They go against each other. There's beefs. There's anger. So horizontal communities tend to be pretty effective. Common symbology, strong symbology. And the last of it, I think, that keeps communities together is persistence. So the three big: social proof, reciprocity, and consistency tend to be. So if they start gifting in the economy, that's a big deal. Uninvited gifts are a huge deal. Who here has ever been given an uninvited gift? How compelled were you wanted to give back, right? That is a very strong social norm. Across cultures, it doesn't matter. If someone gifts you something, you immediately want to give. So the community in which people are spontaneously gifting is really tied together. Reciprocity, that's important, right? Social proof. If one particular element of the community is affirmed by others, that makes that particular element a grounding element. So if everybody wears red on Thursdays, and everybody wears more than few, then it becomes a thing that people do, right? So, and then consistency, a persistence of those things over time. And that just means people have to practice it over and over again and sticking to what they say. I said I was going to do that. But reciprocity is probably the strongest in a situation like that. Information is a gift. So if you're in a community and you share information about something that's useful for the community, ooh, reciprocity immediately kicks in. So those are the things.
Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else? All right.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with the video game Splatoon for like
It's
Wii
been a
and
while.
Switch, but
Yeah.
with that one, there's some game modes that are actually closed off at specific points in time and open up during certain periods of time or certain days.
Mhm.
And I always find that fascinating because it's like the game itself is restricting you from playing the game, but it seems to work really well in terms of players get excited during specific days, and then there's always someone to play against. And I think maybe some of that design has actually been impacted by esports culture because I think Splatoon is often featured as one of Nintendo's key esports titles right now. So I was wondering how esports culture has influenced the design of video games over time, and if there's any trends in design that have resulted from that.
Yes, video games since the esports, since the MLG crew hit the airwaves, right? The designers will tap them for ideas in terms of the kinds of play, the kinds of tech they might want to use. That's a mixed bag of success as a player, right? Because esports players require fast twitch reflex, a particular type of competitive technological interface that a regular player may not, right? So a user may not, a casual user or a person or a very committed fan may not find that particularly useful, right? I know. I remember commentary once where the designers were asking some MLG players what they thought would be great for Call of Duty, and the community was sort of saying, "Yeah, no." So it depends on what it might be. In terms of the game you mentioned, the design element also works to another very kind of sociologically grounded way of seeing things, exclusivity. So if content is delivered in segments and you have to work for it, it makes that particular segment of the content seem exclusive, that only a few people can get it, that you have to go a certain distance to, you have to labor a little bit, and that creates a value to it. So games that design those kinds of systems, you'll see people laboring effectively. They call it the grind. People will grind in World of Warcraft for a certain amount of hours, right? So they can get a certain amount of, like a particular item. But that's different, I think. I think where I saw the MLG thing really kick in was in things like in video games like Call of Duty, where in things as trick shots, KDs, or kill to death ratios, or things like gear that you use. Astros, for example, surround sound headsets, because the MLG people used it, everybody wanted to use it, right? So those are kind of like product, like straight up branding and product placement and endorsements. So yeah, but it informs, but not absolutely. Okay. Last chance. All right. Thank you.